Welcome to BBC News. I'm Gavin Gray. Our top stories. Tornadoes and storms leave at least 29 people dead in the southern United States. As snow starts to fall, forecasters warn of an historic blizzard still to come. Here in the UK, the army is called in to deal with severe flooding, which has forced people out of their homes and left thousands without electricity in the north of England. As it battles to retake the city of Ramadi from so-called Islamic State fighters, the Iraqi military says it's taken control of the last IS stronghold there. And it wasn't easy. The man who successfully rowed his boat solo from the United States all the way across the Pacific to Australia describes his journey.
It's been difficult the whole way, but in fairness, that's what I was looking for. I just didn't realise that it was going to be so difficult.
Hello. Severe weather has hit a large area of the southern United States over the Christmas holidays, resulting in at least 29 deaths. Now, these are the states which have seen the most damage from the powerful storms, tornadoes and flooding which came with them. Officials have warned that the misery is set to continue for some. Parts of Texas and Oklahoma could suffer what's being called an historic blizzard, bringing very large snowfalls. We begin our coverage with this report from Rachel Wright.
In the cold light of day, the terrible devastation caused by tornadoes on the outskirts of Dallas, Texas. The worst hit area was in Garland, in the northeast, where 8 people were killed. Cars blown off highways and homes were flattened. 3 other deaths were reported in the central part of the city.
I was just hearing my kids screaming at me like, "Mom, you okay?" And I scream at them. That's all I can hear it, because all the glass, because all this was glass before, so the glass was like, you just hear the crack.
Officials said that more than 600 buildings were damaged in the Dallas area, the 4th most populous in the United States, where about 7 million people live.
Oh my gosh, it's big!
This was the moment when one of the tornadoes hit Texas on Saturday night.
Here it is.
One of more than a dozen. The size only made apparent by power flashes as electricity lines were destroyed.
It was just normal freight train type sound, and the next thing you know, everything was, we all the neighbors, everybody, we all went in and took our safe area and hunkered down for a little bit, and 15 seconds later, it was over with. It was gone. Next thing you know, we got a skylight in my kitchen.
Among the fatalities, several were killed when their cars were lifted off the motorway. Others were buried under rubble. Saturday's tornadoes follow a week of storms which have left a trail of devastation across the south-central region. Hundreds have been made homeless. This one tore a path 100 miles long between Mississippi and Tennessee. Flash flooding in Alabama was the result of record rainfalls since last Wednesday. As of Sunday morning, there were about 440 flights cancelled because of the extreme weather. But the worst may be yet to come. Snow has begun falling and a historic blizzard has been forecast. People in Oklahoma and Texas have been told to brace themselves. Rachel Wright, BBC News.
Well, with us now is Mark Fox. He's the warning coordination meteorologist for the National Weather Service in Dallas, Texas. Thanks for your time. We've seen these pictures of the amazing devastation brought by the tornadoes, but now the snow. How bad are you expecting that to be?
Luckily, we're not expecting the snow to be that bad here in Dallas-Fort Worth, but out toward Amarillo, Lubbock, they're already seeing about 10 to 16 inches of some snow. So they are seeing some snow, blowing snow, and definitely a kind of a historic blizzard for there. Not going to make it all the way over here, thankfully. We've had our hands full, of course, with the tornadoes and a little bit too much rain.
We don't have that expression, historic blizzard, here. So what is that?
Well, that does not happen around here. In Texas, normally we get a little bit of snow here and there, and in West Texas, you can get a foot or two of snow here and there, but usually it doesn't come with the winds And this is going to be a once in a lifetime thing for a lot of folks out in West Texas. So that's where we get the historic blizzard coming in. Not too many of these have ever happened around here.
Now, you mentioned about that amount of snow that's likely to fall. What are some of the wind speeds that have been measured, or indeed some of the rainfall as well?
Well, we've had a couple of inches here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, up to around 3 to 5 inches in some spots, and probably even closer to about 7 or 8 in a few areas. And the snowfall, about 10 to 16 is what they're expecting. Already seeing some drifts a little bit that high. So quite a bit of rain and then transitioning over to snow, and a lot of wind speeds up around 30 to 40 miles per hour, even a few gusts up to around 60, 65 miles per hour. So definitely not a day for a lot of traveling going on out in West Texas today.
But this is not normally the peak time of year for these things, is it? You're normally expecting that your spring in about another 3 months.
Yeah, the snow is more or less on schedule. We typically get a little bit more in January and February, but the spring-like weather that we've had here in North Texas, and including those pictures you showed just a little bit earlier, that normally comes around April, May, and June, not in December. Not unprecedented. We did have a December 26th storm back in 2009, but this is one that a lot of people are not going to forget either.
Indeed. Mark Fox there from the National Weather Service in Dallas, Texas. Thanks for your time.
Anytime.
Well, meanwhile, the worst flooding in 50 years is continuing in parts of South America, where more than 150,000 people have been forced to evacuate their homes. The flooding is across Argentina, Uruguay and Brazil, but one of the worst hit countries is Paraguay, as Regid Ahmed reports.
This is the result of days of heavy rain across parts of South America. Major rivers in low-lying areas have swollen, flooding towns and homes and leaving thousands in the region without shelter. The worst affected areas are in Paraguay, where the rivers are still rising and threatening to burst their banks as more rain is forecast. The government here has declared a state of emergency to try and get relief funds to the 130,000 people who have been forced to flee. But for some, help isn't coming fast enough.
We don't have water, we don't have light, we don't even have food to eat.
Please do something for us. It shouldn't be that they just come when they need our votes and then they run off.
The heavy summer rains are being blamed on the El Niño phenomenon, and they've hit along the borders of Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil and Uruguay, forcing 3 major rivers to swell and flood vast areas. In northern Argentina, some 20,000 people have been evacuated and water levels are still rising. In Brazil, President Dilma Rousseff has been touring affected areas in the south, where thousands have been evacuated across 40 towns in the wake of the torrential rains.
First, we have to rescue the people. Second is the rebuilding of the city and access to roads. And third is the project of moving these families away from flood risk areas.
But before any rebuilding can begin, the rains need to stop and the water levels need to subside. Regid Ahmed, BBC News.
And there's also been severe flooding here in the UK. Some 500 soldiers have been brought into the worst hit areas of northern England, with around another 1,000 put on standby. Rescue teams have been evacuating residents in the city of York, where water levels are still rising. Thousands of people remain without power. Our correspondent Judith Moritz is in York, where 2 rivers have burst their banks.
After Cumbria and Lancashire, now it's Yorkshire's turn. Another day, another county in the grip of the floods. The people of York knew their city was vulnerable, but no one expected it on this scale. The warnings came yesterday. The call to evacuate was made last night, but not everyone could get out easily and many had to be rescued. At Tadcaster near York, fire crews helped several families.
Last night we started putting the sandbags up and the boards up, but the water came so quick. Before we could even get everything upstairs, the water just came in. We were stuck upstairs.
But not everybody has been happy to leave home despite the warnings.
A lot of people want to stay in their houses, quite stoic about the fact that it's their house. And I think whilst the weather's good, it's a nice warm dry day, they'll be fine. It's when the day tends to progress into the evening, it starts to get dark, if the power goes off, and that's when people will change, and priorities tend to change then quite quickly.
On this road east of the city centre, the water levels have been creeping up all day. Helen Rawling has a ground floor flat and is worried that she may have to leave it.
I've been here 20 years and never seen anything like it. I mean, I'm quite concerned now at the level that it's getting to, that it could potentially get into the flat, and that we may need to look at moving out.
Mountain rescue teams are helping from across the north of England, and extra troops have been brought in as part of what is now a massive emergency effort. In York, this is the nerve centre where they're keeping track of the floods and of the teams out working.
Hugely dynamic situation, and all driven by what's going to happen with the water levels, which continue to be on the rise, although some uncertainty about what that's going to mean. So we've deployed from Lancashire, where we were supporting what was going on there yesterday, with about 200 troops, more on the way now.
A plea has been made for an extra 5,000 sandbags. Some flood barriers had to be lifted because the pumps were overwhelmed, meaning areas of York that would usually be protected were left vulnerable.
We've decided to deploy more military resources, more military personnel to help. But let me say, the emergency services have done a fantastic job and continue to do so, and they deserve the whole nation's thanks. But of course, at this time of year particularly, we all feel huge sympathy with those who've been flooded and have had to leave their homes.
Elsewhere in Yorkshire, Leeds city centre has been badly flooded after the River Aire reached record levels. And away from the cities in rural Yorkshire, there's little respite either. This city is functioning, but with difficulty. Tonight, the telephone exchange was flooded, and for a short time, 999 calls were unavailable, but they're now back on. The non-emergency line is still down, and fire crews are working to pump water out of one of the electricity substations, with a fear that power could be lost to 50,000 homes. The worst of this isn't yet over. Judith Moritz, BBC News, York.
Iraqi forces have made fresh gains against militants from the so-called Islamic State. They're on the verge of retaking the major city of Ramadi, west of Baghdad, which fell to IS in May in what was seen as an embarrassing defeat. The army has just regained control of a former government compound there. It's the last key position in Ramadi. IS have been using the compound to organise against the Iraqi army, who have been trying to retake the city for weeks. The BBC's Tom Afesi sent this report from Baghdad.
This is what it takes to retake a city from so-called Islamic State. The scene in Ramadi after a 6-day offensive with Iraqi soldiers leading a ground campaign supported by airstrikes from the coalition forces. Iraqi troops fought a battle street by street, house to house. IS fighters had months to build their defense. The whole city center was booby-trapped. But the security forces have now forced the jihadis to abandon their stronghold, the former provincial government compound, from where they organized their resistance. Taking control of this position is key to retaking Ramadi. Sporadic fighting continues in the neighborhood, but Iraqi forces are confident they now have the upper hand.
Our operations that started a few days ago saw a rough day today for the armed forces and counter-terrorism forces, but we gained control of Al-Huz, which is the key to enter the governmental square.
And this is what Iraqi soldiers want to forget when they abandoned the city to Islamic State fighters. Pictures of their hasty retreat were an embarrassment for the country. It's taken months for the security forces to work out a plan to retake Ramadi. They first isolated the city from all sides to cut off IS militant supply routes before this final push. This is a success in the fight against Islamic State, but it is only the start of a battle that will get much tougher in the north of the country. Tom Afesi, BBC News, Baghdad.
Hundreds of Syrian Christians took to the streets of their war-torn capital Damascus on Sunday for a Christmas parade. The revelers in the city's Qasr district, which has suffered mortar attacks since 2012, gathered for the parade with their families and children. Reports said many were relieved at the news of the death of Zaran Aloush, leader of the most powerful Islamist insurgent group in the Damascus suburbs. Stay with us on BBC World News, because in a few minutes we'll find out why some of the Soviet Union's most feared nuclear missiles ended up in a museum in Ukraine.